Israel in about 140 planes conducting these operations over 1,000 miles across the Middle East, involving aerial refuelers and different support aircraft to be able to hit Iran, which, unlike Hamas and Hezbollah, Iran has a pretty robust Russian-made air defense system all throughout the country. If that was just exposed this morning and Israel was able to send all of its planes over, no damage to any of their aircraft, Israel reporting, no pilots killed or wounded in this attack, but pretty widespread damage to more than a dozen military sites all across Iran, then we'll probably see Iran sit out for at least a couple of days, assess before they start to ramp up their public rhetoric again.
Israel has carried out what it called precise strikes on military targets in Iran overnight. Military bases in the west and southwest of Tehran are reported to have been targeted. The Israel Defense Forces released a statement as the strikes took place. Here's their spokesman, Daniel Hagari.
In response to months of continuous attacks from the regime in Iran against the State of Israel, right now, the Israel Defense Forces is conducting precise strikes on military targets in Iran. The regime in Iran and its proxies in the region have been relentlessly attacking Israel since October 7th on 7 fronts, including direct attacks from Iranian soil. Like every other sovereign country in the world, the State of Israel has the right and the duty to respond. Our defensive and offensive capabilities are fully mobilized. We will do whatever necessary to defend the State of Israel and the people of Israel.
That's Daniel Hagari of the Israel Defense Forces. The strikes have now concluded. Let's speak to Zach Anders, a journalist covering the Middle East. He joins us from Tel Aviv this morning. Zach, good morning.
Hey, good morning.
Good to speak to you. So then, what do we know about what Israel did?
So this is being reported by local Israeli channels, 20 targets in 3 waves. It lasted several hours, began around 2 a.m. here, local time, Jerusalem time. About 140 warplanes involved on the Israeli side, targeting these areas across the entire state of Iran. Now, where we were watching very closely overnight was whether or not this was a targeted attack on oil refinery sites, oil installations, or nuclear sites. We don't have any indication right now, as the sun is coming up, that there were direct hits on some of these key sites. And before this attack even went through, I had conversations with Israeli officials about attacking Iranian nuclear sites, if it was to be done in a comprehensive way, would involve dozens of targets because of how they've built up this nuclear capacity over the decades all across the country. So I think the fact that this is about 20 targets, the Israelis are saying, is an indicator that this was not a widespread attack on their nuclear sites. That's not to say that, again, we don't know the full scale of the damage here, so that's not to say that some nuclear sites were included. Some of the strikes in some of the western provinces are, in fact, close to some areas where we know that nuclear regulators have focused in on, and international nuclear staff have gone to some of these sites. So we know some airstrikes are close to these areas, but it does not appear, based on some of the images that we're getting out of Iran right now, that these were widespread to nuclear oil sites. We don't see massive fires burning still this morning. It does appear that this was limited to, as the Israelis are saying, military infrastructure, some of their air defense batteries, and different defense production sites.
We know, Zach, that this is a retaliation for strikes by Iran against Israel, which took place at the start of October. Do we know why it has taken until now for Israel to carry out this action?
There was a lot of different options on the table on the Israeli side, and from everything that we could tell over the last 2 weeks, that there was a intense amount of deliberation and some disagreement within the Israeli security cabinet as to what their response would look like. And as they were preparing some of these response options in that window, the United States provided the THAAD air defense system, one of the 7 THAAD air defense systems they have in the entire world, and one of them being deployed here with dozens of American troops into the area. It was widely believed, and some of the conversations that I have indicated that if they were going to go with the most extreme options on the table, that Iran would retaliate probably right away, and that some of these air defense systems would be needed. A large attack, like a widespread attack on nuclear sites, very sensitive, hitting the regime where it hurts, that would certainly elicit a pretty quick response. Instead, what we see here, and I think what we have been able to learn within the last hour, is that sources on the Israeli side telling Axios and the reporter Barak Ravid that Israel actually warned Iran overnight that this strike was incoming. So I don't think that this was the most extreme option on the table. This appears to be a more limited response in targeting some of these military sites. And it does sound like, based on the fact that Blinken, the Secretary of State, landed in Washington just a few moments before this attack began, that it looks like Israel waited until his Middle East trip was done. That there's going to be some elements here, and based on what I'm hearing, that the Israeli side is trying to communicate to Iran, the U.S. side is trying to communicate to Iran, absorb these blows, let's call this a day, and everybody back to their corners.
Yeah, and I saw one analysis on that note that the sort of suggestion from Iran is that these strikes have been sort of had limited success or even unsuccessful, and if that is the messaging from Iran, perhaps it is some attempt at de-escalating. You know, this hasn't hurt us, this isn't an impact on us, and therefore this can stop here.
And, when they attacked back in early October, the message that they sent to Israel, rather right away, was that we consider this matter closed. And that, in large part, they had, at the time, said this was for rampant Zionist aggression, but it was also very specifically for the killing of Ismail Haniyeh on Iranian soil several months ago, in an event that we're still not entirely sure was an airstrike or was, as the New York Times is reporting, a bomb that was planted potentially with collaborators, saboteurs inside Tehran, killing Hamas's leader Ismail Haniyeh at the time. Iran was never going to let that moment slip. And you go and you zoom out. Where did all these blows? It's like we're watching a heavyweight fight in slow motion that's just taking months and months. But this all began, really, the direct confrontation began back on April 1st when Israel struck a consulate building in Damascus. Almost a week and a half later, that's when Iran first responded with a ballistic missile, drone, and cruise missile attack with some 130 or 300 different pieces of, with drones, 300 drones and ballistic missiles were used back in that April attack. And it's been kind of slow exchanges since then. But Israel had made it very clear that they weren't going to let the 181 ballistic missiles that were fired back in early October go unchecked, unnoticed. A lot of concern here was that the Israeli administration, the Prime Minister Netanyahu, was going to feel very emboldened by Iran's attack and see it as a window and a prime opportunity to try and destabilize the Ayatollah's regime and go after some big targets, potentially target the Ayatollah himself. We don't see right now any reports that there was targeted killings of Iranian leadership, that this was limited to military sites and installations. But that said, it's still very early here, and the sun is coming up in Tehran, coming up here in Jerusalem. So there's still there's some pretty precarious moments that are throughout the day that we'll have to watch for. Certainly, based on the way that Iran has behaved over the last year, you would think that they would not respond right away, or if they have any desire to respond. You got to also ask and question how deep does the Iranian desire go to involve itself in a full-scale conflict with Israel? I think what we've seen overnight tonight here is that Israel, in about 140 planes, conducting these operations over 1,000 miles across the Middle East, involving aerial refuelers and different support aircraft, to be able to hit Iran, which, unlike Hamas and Hezbollah, Iran has a pretty robust Russian-made air defense system all throughout the country. If that was just exposed this morning and Israel was able to send all of its planes over, no damage to any of their aircraft, Israel reporting, no pilots killed or wounded in this attack, but pretty widespread damage to more than a dozen military sites all across Iran, then we'll probably see Iran sit out for at least a couple of days, assess before they start to ramp up their public rhetoric again.
Zach, thank you very much. Thank you for your reporting this morning. That's Zach Anders in Tel Aviv. Just